This is the Whiteleaf Cross in the Chilterns, visible for miles around.
And this, because we couldn't afford to go there again today, the budget wouldn't extend that far, is the Watlington White Mark in the Chilterns, visible for miles around.
So that's 2 chalk marks in the Chiltern Hills, but there is a third.
But it's been missing for 30 years.
Let's find it.
Let's do it.
As with most of these chalk hill marks, its origins are obscure, and the earliest written record we have for it is from Francis Wise in 1742. Feel a bit like this fence is stealing the scene here. Francis Wise dated the White Cross to 910, and he suggested that it commemorates the battle where Edgar the Elder defeated the Danes in 910 at Bledlow, or Bledlaw. Others say that it is a prehistoric hill mark.
That means phallus.
That was later Christianized by the monks at Risborough. There was a priory just down below. However, it does sit meters away from this pair of barrows. It is a long barrow that's been partly excavated, thus the dip in the middle. Doesn't really help the narrative, but I just thought this was a nice little bunch of cowslips here. Others think it was created by the family who held Risborough at the time of the Norman conquest, and others still think it was created at the time of the interregnum by Puritans. I'm no expert, but if I had to put money on it, I would say it's the monks. There are a suspicious number of these hill figures and hill marks in the chalk around the country that are next to the site of monasteries and priories, including the Wilmington Long Man near to Wilmington Priory, and of course the famous Cerne Abbas Giant.
That means phallus. And in terms of the Watlington White Mark, that has been covered comprehensively in another video on this channel, which you can watch at the end after you've watched this one. Don't go and watch it yet. It almost certainly dates to the 18th century. Okay, we're over to GoPro now because we're doing a walking bit. Tweedy and I have parked up at the village of Henton, and we are heading towards the Chiltern Escarpment to find the Bledlow Cross. Now, the reason we've chosen Henton, this was the last place before the Bledlow Cross disappeared. Basically, it was consumed by trees. This was the last place you could see it before it disappeared. And also, interestingly, the last person to look after the cross apparently lived in the village of Henton. And I understand that the last time it was scoured was around about 1991. So it has been out of sight for over 30 years.
We've just had to stop briefly because Mr. WC21 had an unfortunate visitor on the sole of his boot.
The plan had been to have a real clickbaity title of "We discovered the Bledlow, the missing Bledlow Cross." But for once I actually did a recce. They have actually now cleared the trees around the cross. It hasn't been rescoured yet, but you can see it. If you look at the overlay footage from Google Earth, you'll see that up until recently it was completely obscured. Tweedy, they're not currently looking at us, unfortunately. They're looking at the Google Earth images, which will show how up until recently you just could see no sign of this cross.
That's unfortunate because I'm pulling a really funny face at this point.
Now they're looking at some old pictures from around about the time of the Second World War, which will show them how clear this hill was and how in the passage of 60, 70 years, something like that, the cross has been taken over by tree cover, as indeed the whole hill has been. I asked several people when I was here a few weeks ago if they knew anything about the restoration of the Bledlow Cross, and nobody knew a thing, and they live here. But a little bit of searching online, I found an article on the Chiltern Society's Facebook page, and apparently the cross was cleared back in February of this year. And for people watching this in the future, in the 22nd century, this year is 2024. We've walked across the fields to a junction of tracks at the bottom of Wain Hill, and I'm now stood in this fantastic holloway which has recently been identified by a leading YouTube antiquarian as the likely probable original prehistoric route of the Ridgeway. Thanks, Tweedy. And we have that expert with us here today, of course. It's Tweedy. So the Ridgeway, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's well known. It's probably the UK's most famous ancient track. Some sources believe that it dates back 6,000 years. The modern national trail that follows some section of what may have been that historic route goes from Ivanhoe Beacon down to, depending on where you want to end it, possibly Avebury, Overton Hill. And it's likely that this made up a series of short-term paths, but it may well be that some people were required at times to traverse the whole thing from start to finish, and may have also extended further the northeast to Norfolk and Suffolk, and down to the southwest to the coast.
And the significance of that to our story of the Bledlow Cross is that, as we saw at the Whiteleaf Cross, there are those that believe that that is a pagan symbol close to the Ridgeway. And as we're going to see a short way up here, the Bledlow Cross is literally just above Tweedy's proposed course of the Ridgeway. OK, so we've come up the Holloway. We're on the raised bank of that. You can see how deep it is now at this stage. And this is where our lost hill mark is starting to reappear. If you look across, you can see that it has recently been felled. Tweedy, when you were here earlier in the year doing your seminal work on identifying the original course of the Ridgeway, did you notice this area of clear felling?
I think I just walked straight past it. If the felling had begun at that point, then I just assumed it was normal routine felling and didn't realise it had this specific purpose.
On my recce earlier in the year, I actually clambered up through all of this to get to the cross, but subsequently I then found there's an easier way to get to it up here, and that's what Tweedy and I are going to do.
That's what I want. Easy.
Easy.
No peril.
OK, we are nearly there now, so just a breather to tell you a little bit about the known history of the Bledlow Cross. The earliest written record of it is actually only 1827. There is a spurious record of Henry at Cross from 1350 that some people use to rely on to suggest antiquity to this hill mark. But Tweedy is going to have a chat with us in a moment about that.
That often quoted reference from 1350 of Henry at Cross, according to the Buckinghamshire Archaeological Society, a publication they made in the 19th century, may instead be referring to a crossroads which is just outside of Bledlow. You can see that today marked on the map as Cross Lanes. There's a place where another track crosses the Ridgeway, in fact.
So we're now heading off to try and find the Bledlow Cross. We're in the woods. And Tweedy, will you make sure you remember this route? This is getting exciting. I think we're nearly there now. So we're going to be amongst the first people to see this cross properly in over 30 years. It's quite a complicated route, actually. Oh, there we go. Are you remembering the route there, Tweedy?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
No worries, great. And here we are.
The Buckinghamshire Archaeological Society believes the Whiteleaf Cross and the Bledlow Cross to be co-eval.
We're now at the Bledlow Cross, and it really is quite impressive. One of the things that strikes both of us is how deeply cut into the hill it is. OK, Tweedy, you're going to have a look at the cross and come back to us and let us know what you think.
OK, we'll do.
You've had a good look at it there, Tweedy, for about 20 minutes. What's your conclusions?
Yeah, it's definitely a cross. Is that Bledlow down there, or is that is that Henton?
No, so that's Henton. That's Henton. Where we that's where we walked from.
And Bledlow's Chinnor.
Bledlow is right the way round there.
Right.
So
why is it
the Bledlow Cross name is been a bit misleading in reality. Some people have also linked this cross, the same as we saw at Whiteleaf, to the that battle between the Saxons and the Danes, Blooded Hill, the incorrect name of Bledlow. So maybe that's how it's become attached with that. Although I think locally as well, the hill is sometimes called Bledlow Hill.
I feel like that line of sight down to Henton is probably significant. It feels like there's a all of my lines of sight seem to be drawing me towards that village.
It does, doesn't
suggesting this location here has something to do with Henton being down there. It should be the Henton Cross, not the
It should be the Henton Cross. And like the Whiteleaf Cross, it's deep, isn't it? You know, it's deeply cut into the hillside, which is interesting.
My hunch, and I have nothing to base this on, is that at some point there may have been something like a priory or some sort of monastic settlement in Henton over there as well.
I have seen pictures online that if you look that way, which is effectively east, when the hill was bare of these trees, you did have a perfect view along that arm of the cross to the Whiteleaf Cross.
But it seems to me as though you'd be looking at it more as a sort of X shape from that direction, whereas the view down to Henton is looking perfectly along this axis of the cross. So it would look like a cross from Henton and not like an X.
You're really not happy, are you, Tweedy, about it being called the Bledlow Cross? Tweedy, you need to walk up and down the cross, up and down this length of the cross here. And according to a local legend that I found online, if you walk up and down, it will ensure that you never get lost ever again. And that would be useful in general for Tweedy Outdoors, I think.
I've got OS maps.
We've actually stumbled across the top of the holloway that we were on earlier. This is where it sort of reaches gets towards the top of the hill. There you can see it. Ignore the obligatory Chilterns camp, and as you can see, the earthworks sort of peter out as we reach the crest of the hill. Tweedy was just saying that he feels that up here, the routeway, the holloway, feels more planned.
This is more like a planned earthwork to me. The holloway down there could just be natural footfall over the millennia, if it really is that old. But somehow when it turns this corner here, I get more of a sense of a deliberate earthwork.
Yeah, and it is the Ridgeway, isn't it? This is, you are absolutely right.
I believe
this
so.
Is the Ridgeway, the proper Ridgeway. Chinnor Barrow's on the ghost train there.
I'd managed to convince myself when we were over at the Bledlow Cross that it was almost certainly the work of monks and definitely of relatively modern times, the 18th century. And yet there is this nagging doubt in my mind, given that here we are a very short distance from the Bledlow Cross, and we have a pair of barrows. This is Chinnor barrows. And what's intriguing about it is if you remember back at Whiteleaf Cross, I was confused looking at that long barrow there, and I was convinced surely that is a pair of bowl barrows, and it had a sort of saddle in the middle where possibly some material had been excavated or eroded. This is, I believe, officially recorded as a pair of bowl barrows, and yet once again they're adjoining and they have a sort of a saddle in the middle. Could this in fact actually be older and also be a long barrow? And is that too much of a coincidence if we have similarly constructed long barrows very close to the Whiteleaf Cross and also close to the Bledlow Cross?
We are now atop Chinnor Hill itself, and Tweedy is preparing some wild cooking for us. We've got sausages and mash with onion gravy. Unbelievable. I'm not going to include that in this video. You need to go over to Tweedy Outdoors in order to see what that's all about. Tweedy has treated me to some fabulous wine, and you can find out about that on Tweedy Outdoors. There we have it then. That's the Bledlow Cross, missing for 30 years and now gradually coming back into view. Tweedy, are you sure this is the way?
Yeah, I remember this foliage.